You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and this is the show where you get expert advice about the heavy duty parts you buy and sell and keep you informed about what's happening in the industry. My name is Jamie Irvin. I'm the host of the Heavy Duty Parts Report, and today's episode is going to be a little different than what you're used to. In 2020, we've been testing doing live interviews, and we haven't been broadcasting those on the podcast. I interviewed Scott Bolts, and we talked about the future of heavy-duty parts in a live interview that we did several weeks ago. Now, you will notice that the audio quality is a little bit different than the usual podcast that we air, but I think the subject matter is of high enough importance that it warranted its own spot on the Heavy Duty Parts Report podcast. And so that is what you will be listening to today. We go deep into this conversation. This is an extended interview. I believe it is going to come in at over 40 minutes long, but the conversation itself is of high enough quality, and it's important enough for everyone who is in heavy duty parts to think about the future and where we're going and the influences that are shaping what we're going to see next in 2021 and beyond. I hope you enjoy this interview. And if you'd like to watch any of our live interviews, they now broadcast simultaneously on YouTube, on our Heavy Duty Parts Report Facebook page, and on my personal LinkedIn profile at Jamie L. Irvin every Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain, 12 Eastern. So by all means, if you'd like to tune in to our live interviews, watch those interviews, and now you will actually be able to participate by commenting live, and we'll be able to include you in the conversation. So I'm very excited about this. We'll talk more about the future of HDPR Live, but for today, I wanted to give you the opportunity to listen into this great conversation I had with Scott Bolts. Welcome to another HDPR Live. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. Today we have Scott Bolts making another appearance on HDPR Live. Scott is a leader at a heavy-duty parts manufacturer and has extensive experience in parts manufacturing, distribution, sales, and marketing. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Jamie, it's good to see you again, man. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to have, I think what's going to be a great discussion about the future of heavy-duty parts distribution. In preparation for the conversation, you asked me to read a book called The Fourth Turning: What Cycles of History Tell Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny. This was written by two individuals, William Strauss and Neil Howe. I read the book, and I'm fascinated by what is now called the Strauss-Howe generational theory. So I thought what we would do is, before we got into the future of heavy-duty parts distribution, perhaps you could summarize kind of the big idea behind the fourth turning. What does this all have to do with our industry?
Well, certainly. And I'd like to establish at the beginning that I'm not an expert in demographics or really any field other than the things that I've learned throughout my career. It's been my responsibility in both a sales and marketing capacity to create business cases that go before very high levels of boards, sometimes Bain Capital level. And so you really have to do your homework, and you have to try to understand how the tectonic plates are shifting amongst themselves to really make predictions about what the future of our industry looks like. And probably around about 20 years ago, I came across the fourth turning, and I was really trying to understand demographics and generations, because how that parlays into certain generational moods. You can understand how certain personas within marketing actually are driven to behave in certain ways. And so again, I'm not an expert, but the reason why I asked you to read The Fourth Turning is because most of us look at history, and you can look at the history of our trucking industry, you can look at the history of the world. I mean, in any frame of reference, most of us look at it in one dimension. Let's call it the x-axis. And so it's just dates and periods of time. And so there was a war here, and this guy got elected, and this and that, right?
Right. That's like the past is behind us and the future is in front of us, and we're traveling on a linear line from past through the present to the future.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And if you look at it that way, it's absolutely true, but it seems arbitrary. And there was an economist in the 1920s out of Russia. His name was Kondratiev, and he was the first one that I know of that came up with the concept of a long wave economic cycle. and it's sinusoidal. So there's a rise, a peak, a fall, crossing of zero, negative, a bottom, and then a rise again. And they seem to churn over what's called a seculum, or about 80 to 100 years. It's not a fixed number. It's kind of like, depending on what's going on in the world at the time, can compress or expand that. And so he was the first to really come out with that. And so I studied him extensively. And when you talk about history of what, right? Excuse me. So economics, social developments, technology, which is, I think, really the crux of what you've been coming out with in terms of your predictions of what the future looks like. But there's all these cyclical natures, and they kind of follow each other. And so we have the x-axis of history, right, in time. If you had the y-axis, which is age. So at some point in time, you were 0 years old, and then you were 1, and then 2, and then 3. So algebraically, it's a slope of 1, right? And you can group generations together. I think we can all agree that generations have a persona, a proclivity to certain things in terms of how they consume media and economics and everything else. And if you graph those two things, I know you want to say something. Let me finish this thought. If you graph them, you get stripes about 20 years long that scale 1 over 1 over time until mortality. And we all experience those points in time in history together, but we're parts of different groups that have different proclivities.
I was just thinking about when you were describing the different kind of characteristics of generations. The best way that I can think of it is like when we were kids and you grew up with grandparents that lived through like the Great Depression, they had a very, very specific kind of approach towards life, which was very, very different than their children who grew up post World War II in that baby boomer kind of golden age of development of U.S. economics. And then their children, again, were very different when they were going through like the 60s, right? And then kids who grew up in the 80s pre-internet, and then kids who grew up with only knowing the internet. And when you just think about all those different groups of people, what comes to mind is kind of some common characteristics within each generation. And so if you put what Scott just said in that context, you really are grasping these characteristics and differences between generations and how they impact people. And what the book is saying is that this actually rolls on a cycle. So just to make sure that everybody kind of is on the same page.
Yeah, and the idea of the cycle, that is, as soon as one generation of a certain persona ages out, reaches mortality, they create a vacuum that is regenerated. So if we want to understand the buying decisions at the trucking fleets and the buying decisions that govern distribution, we need to look at who's emerging into power. And that's currently Generation X. Now, the boomer generation is hanging on for dear life, right? There's in a lot of ways. But at some point in time, their money will leave the market, and their efforts will leave the positions that they hold, and it'll be subsumed by the Generation X, which was a largely unprotected generation. I mean, there's no other generation that I can talk to that's currently alive that knows what a latchkey kid is, right? We know what that is. And so there's certain things in the personality of those generations that deliver things later. So it's not like you have one personality when you're 0 to 20, and that's it for the rest of time. It evolves. And that's true of the millennials, and it's true of the next generation, which some are calling the homeland generation. It's true of the boomers. If you think of the hippies of 1969 at Woodstock, those same people are get off my lawn conservatives now. And so there's a dynamic that moves over time. And that's why I like that XY axis of everything moving in slopes. And as things happen, they happen to all of us differently.
Right. So let's just kind of put all of this into context related to parts distribution. So I see the end of traditional distribution, kind of the model that we've been using for many decades. And I kind of see that really accelerating in the 2020s. And I'll just kind of summarize my thesis in a nutshell. So I think very soon an all makes manufacturer will decide to just abandon traditional distribution, and they're going to go direct with a B2C e-commerce model. And I think that that will start a chain reaction in the industry, where I think you're going to basically have three responses from manufacturers. You're going to have manufacturers, some of them, they're going to rededicate themselves to the traditional distribution model, in essence, doubling down on what they've always done. You're going to have some who are going to just feel like they have no choice but to follow suit, and they're going to start to move in that direction. And then you're probably going to have a big bulk of them in the middle that are going to try to straddle the two go-to-market strategies, right? They're going to try to maintain their B2B distribution model, and then they're going to evolve a direct-to-consumer model to try to stay relevant and compete. And any way that you look at it, I think that when you can accurately identify parts with an app, and you can order them with one click and make it very simple, and that product can be delivered within a couple hours if you're in an urban center, or next day in a rural, that technology is going to be a driver of a different buying experience. And I think that all of those factors, combined with the demographic shift of there, I believe the last statistic I saw is for every 4 baby boomers, there are only 3 Generation X. And so you have this massive amount of experience and knowledge exiting and retiring. You don't have enough people to completely fill that vacuum until about 2030, as millennials fully develop into the age and experience level where they can kind of fill the gap in senior leadership. So in the next 10 years, we got all of these factors swirling around us. And my thesis is that just traditional distribution is going to see its end, very similar to what happened when Sears revolutionized retail sales at the turn of the 20th century. And really what we're talking about is the Amazon effect, which has been ongoing in other industries for 20 years now, but is really starting to hit us hard. And we are a late adopting industry, so it's not surprising that it took as long as it did to get to us. So that's the summary of my thoughts. And you're on the show today to kind of discuss that, and let's try to give people as many perspectives as possible, because really what hangs in the balance is people's jobs, and we want to serve the industry. So if we can, if there's a leadership group listening right now, whether you're a manufacturer or a parts distributor, or you're an owner of a repair shop, this all impacts you, and the more perspective you can get, probably the better decisions you can make as you transition through what undoubtedly, regardless of what happens, the 2020s are going to be a dynamic decade, as we've seen 8 months in, 9 months in.
I would agree, and I respect your forevision, right? Your ability to look over the horizon and try to see what it is that's going to be more likely than not. And when I watch a lot of your videos that talk about this very topic, what I see is a point A and a point B in a direct line that assumes the things that you talked about, that it's early adopters, and then there's going to be the early majority and then the late majority, which is the law of diffusion of innovation, right? And that all those things that we know academically are true substantiate to a great degree what you're talking about. And the reason why I asked you to read the book is because it's a foundational piece for my proposition that is a little different than yours. But if you read it from a different point of view, you can actually use that book to make your argument, right? And that's why I think it's really interesting. So here's the thing you have. You just laid out that the boomers are going to be exiting over time, but their influence is going to be waning. And you have a Generation X, which is our generation, that's going to be late to the game in terms of accepting those managerial and director level purchasers, buyers, managers, etc., business managers. So it's not that there's a lack of knowledge. It's actually pent up knowledge, right? That I want to move into a new direction, and I just have to wait until the economy is such that we can do so, right? And so if that's true, and we can agree that's true, then you have to understand that there is a certain personality based around that, especially when you drill down into trucking, right? And so is it male or female? We know their age brackets, Generation X, right? And then what is their level of education? What is their level of experience? What do they know how to do for a living? Did they start as a mechanic and now they're the director of maintenance? All those things come into play. And so if you understand the proclivities of that generation, then you also understand what it is that technology will drive. And one of the things that Neil Howe talks about is that it's a mistake to think that technology drives behavior or technology drives generations, meaning, the millennials are this, and it's because they have Facebook and apps and things like that. It's actually what he proclaims is the other way around, is that it's our ability to consume technology and our desire to consume what kind of technology drives the actual net effect, right? And so I have a couple things I really want to bring up around that topic, but I'd like to get your thoughts with your current A and B direct line and what I see as a kind of an oscillation amongst that line.
So, okay, so what specifically did you want to ask?
So you see within a decade, the 20s, a complete and total revolution, a complete and total disruption of distribution. And we can look at things like automotive. Automotive is often correlated with heavy duty. They're very different, by the way, but you can draw parallels between them. And companies that try to play in both spaces have certain types of challenges if they don't understand the differences.
Yeah.
So
what I guess what I really see is, like, I've worked for 20 years now, and for like 15 of those 20 years, I have been blocked by baby boomers from seeing what's going on in other industries and trying to adopt that technology and use it effectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as more and more of this technology gets better and better and better, like you said, the technology isn't changing our behavior. For example, social media didn't change our behavior. It just put a great big spotlight on it and made a lot of what we do public. Right. So as technology gets better in parts identification and the power of controlling the parts transfers from the people at the parts counter to the people who actually buy the parts, I know by looking at all of our buying behavior of our generation, and I know that, like, as early as 3.5 years ago, when I took a new sales position and I had people of my generation and younger high-fiving me because I would text, because the salesperson before me wouldn't. It's the use of that technology that is going to force everyone in the industry that is involved, from manufacturing right through to distribution, to adapt the buying journey to the people who now have the power in their hands. And we've seen that for 20 years in other industries. And I don't see any argument that would convince me that that's not going to happen in our industry. And that really is where I see, yes, when I use strong language like the end of traditional distribution, and that is by design, to get people's attention to stop for a minute and think about, well, what would happen if I'm a manufacturer and my biggest customer is one of the big 5 aftermarket distributors? What would happen if they went bankrupt, like Sears or like one of these other companies in another industry? What would happen if 37% of my business disappeared tomorrow? Right? So that's the perspective that I'm coming from, is that we're going to use this technology in new ways. We're going to empower the people on the ground buying and installing parts and this is going to absolutely force the other people in the distribution channel to say, we've got to reimagine how we do this and keep up, because there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, there always are. And the people who are innovating are probably going to push the limits of what's possible in the physical movement. This is a physical part, right? There's still some limits to taking this physical part, it's a coffee mug, but it's physical, and moving it from where I am to where you are. Right. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, and again, that could be quite real, and it could be quite quick, the way that you frame it. I think there's other elements that need to be considered, though. And so there's energy, there's demographics, there's economics, there's supply chain, there is consumption, there's GDP. I mean, there's a lot of layers to what's going on. So the price of fuel, the price of diesel matters, right? The price of employing people in a call center, for instance, to replace a geographical sales team has a cost as well. There's also I think a great difference between automotive manufacturing and heavy duty parts manufacturing, that most manufacturers are smaller than people think. And so they have to be nimble and to remain profitable, whether you deal on the OEM level or the aftermarket level, and some do both. There's a lot of considerations to be made. So here's my contention to you. And we have not had an opportunity to pre-discuss this, but I really wanted to lay that ground floor with you. So you see a quick move directly to everything online. And I can see the argument for that. And if you follow the fourth turning messaging, it's that these great shifts happen in the winter, in the crisis, which is what we're in. Have you seen the news? I mean, seriously, think about what it was like even a year ago or 5 years ago compared to what it is today. If I'd gotten on the phone with you and said, these are the things that are going on in our industry and in the world, you would have thought it was nuts. We're in crisis. We're in the winter. So the great things change here, but I contend something different. And so I think that our industry has been in a waxing mode of consolidation. And so companies are getting bigger, right? All the behemoths that in the dealerships and all the behemoths in the independent WDs that are consuming through venture capital and other means, all these locations, and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what comes with bigness is leverage, right? And so all it takes is a significant economic event for that leverage to become way too expensive to either continue to grow or to even maintain the stuff that is maybe slower than it should be, right? So what I contend, different than what you see happening, and I see an element of online movement. We can talk about that in a minute. But what I see is a reversal of that consolidation, and we go back to, over a period of about 20 years, a deconsolidation. So the return of the mom and pop dealership, the return of the mom and pop parts house, the return of the direct support to the fleet in a very much more personal way because of demographics, in the sense of how Gen X likes to deal with things, and the emergence of the millennials as well.
Okay, so I guess, I agree absolutely with the trend line of consolidation and conglomerates and all of that. That kind of happened through the tail end of the summer season into the fall.
It goes way back further than that.
Does it go back further than that? So that began in the spring, yes. at the end of.
You're talking about of the saculum
of consolidation. Like when you think of consolidation over the last 20 years, and I agree with you 100%. We're in winter, like we're in crisis again.
So the fall, the unraveling, correct?
Yeah, the unraveling. Yeah. So when what I see, because I agree with you, and part of my thesis is that innovative companies are going to be able to take advantage of technology and use it to deconsolidate the industry, and I'm completely on board with you with that. Because I see the trends in other industries where when things start to get too big, they collapse under their own weight. And even Jeff Bezos said not that long ago, I think it was only a couple years ago, he went public and said that one day Amazon will go bankrupt.
Yes,
just like Sears did. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's going to happen. So I'm completely with you on that. But why would the return of mom and pop? No, that's not why. How will the return of mom and pop leverage technology to their advantage to deconsolidate the industry? That's what I'm curious to see from your perspective, how you kind of see that unfolding.
Absolutely. And so the mom and pop that we knew when we first came into the industry is now out of the industry, right? They're gone. And they were of different generations with different proclivities. When I say mom and pop, that's also, we should get rid of that saying, probably. It's going to be Bob and Jim or something like that, right? It's going to be two guys that work for a distributor. They're going to go off and do their own thing, and they know how to do it better, and they might, and they really, in many cases do. And so Bob and Jim we have to look at where they are in the generational cycle of things and what their proclivities are. And so if they're distrustful of large organizations and they're distrustful of high regulation, and they want a direct, tangible relationship as individuals in control of how they buy, then the online buying process just becomes a tool, right? but it doesn't eliminate the necessity of near geographical distribution or influence by sales professionals and engineers and everything else, because the technology of the truck is going to continue to evolve. And so as soon as someone gets something figured out, the technology changes. That's a fact of life. We've known that forever. And so you have to think about the people that are going to be in charge at the time that this big thing takes place. I don't deny that technology, we're using technology as basically a fundamental term to say online ordering of things and parts and distribution, but I don't think it's one step from distribution to the fleet. And the way that I can substantiate that, and I'll turn it back over to you, is that I have a good friend who owns a very successful garage here in the town that I live. And he's got like 7 bays and a bunch of technicians, and he's busy all the time. We're close friends, and I have a hard time getting my truck in sometimes, right? I'm like, I just need brakes and I got to get ahead of the airport. Well, we can do it next week. And I asked him, I called him up ahead of this conversation because I want to understand the automotive side better. And I said, tell me about like how you buy parts. He said, all online. And I was like, you know, and then he's like, I'm like, wait, tell me what that means. And he goes, okay, well, there's this segment that comes from the warehouse that's on this big buying group, like Keystone Automotive, for instance, or something like that. And he goes, but a lot of my parts come from local distribution, but I buy them online through some network, right? So it's like a buying group. And so he's part of a lot of people that own technical automotive garages that come together and buy together. But the way they source those products is still local in a lot of ways. And so if the automotive, we can maybe agree, the automotive market is a leading indicator of technology and the heavy duty is a lagging. And if we can agree on that, we look at where they are and where we are, and then we can't like quantum leap them, right? So where does that fit together in your kind of understanding?
That actually fits quite nicely because, yeah, I agree. Heavy duty is like, let's just maybe 10 years behind automotive, something like that.
More,
maybe a little more. But so let me ask you something about your friend who runs that shop. Does he go down to Napa and visit with the parts counter and talk to the parts people anymore?
Not at all.
Okay. So it's that part. And maybe that is where I needed to clarify my language to make sure that we're on the same page. So it's that part of traditional distribution that I see vanishing rapidly. Mm-hmm. And I see the rise of an online distributor who may play the part of the new distribution component that manufacturers use to get their parts to the end user, competing with the manufacturer who just says, you know what, the closer I can get to the end user, the better. And so it's like, you got to think from my perspective as a sales account manager working for retail, right? With that traditional counter, with a parts manager, a branch manager, a bunch of counter guys. I'm on the road handing out donuts, handing out flyers. This is still the way the big distributors right now operate their businesses. And it's that part that is completely, to me, irrelevant. It no longer fits into what people our age and younger want from a quote unquote local distributor, right? We just don't want that. The thing that has made automotive able to do it is aces and pies. The ability for aftermarket to categorize every single nut and bolt and part on a car by year, make, and model allows them to provide that online experience and buying journey for a repair shop like your friend. Mm-hmm. And that has not existed in heavy duty. And it's just making headlines this year that aces and pies are going to start to be a factor. But you have people investing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in the development of their own year, make, model platforms. And so it's that shift that I see happening.
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I don't know what aces and pies are.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And maybe people listening don't. So aces and pies is a method of categorizing all of the parts in a given year, make, and model of a vehicle. And it allows people to access that information through is another industry expression, an API, which is basically like just my system is allowed to link with your system and pull relevant data across. And so just think of when you go down to the truck dealer and what's the first question they ask?
VIN.
What's your VIN?
Yeah.
Because in that VIN is a chart. And in that chart is every nut, bolt, and part for your vehicle. And then through technology, through APIs, they pull that data, they come up with a part number, they go to the shelf, they hand you the part physically. Right. So that is how that system works. It's quite complex and it's very data driven, and heavy duty just has not been able to do that because we build work trucks and we spec work trucks differently. Manufacturers don't build 15,000 Nissan Altimas identical. That's not how truck OEs work, right? They start with a base and then everybody specs their work truck a little differently, and you end up with the 2020 Peterbilt, but many of them are spec'd differently. And so there's a lot of variant. And because of that variant, we just as an industry have not been able to get the data to be able to provide that buying journey shift. And now it's available. And It's becoming available right now. And this is a driving force in behind a couple things. And one of them, to me, is the end of that going down to your local parts store, chatting on the counter, getting your part and going back to your shop and fixing your truck, or phoning them up, which 49% of heavy duty parts are still bought with a phone call. Phoning your local distributor, giving them, hey, I'm working on such and such, I need a drag link. Yep. And the experienced parts person who's been doing it for 35 years knows exactly what you're talking about, sends you the part, and you fix the part a couple hours later. It's that part of the whole distribution channel that is just, and I think that's part of deconsolidation as well. As that collapses, that's going to accelerate deconsolidation in the industry.
Indeed. But it's that exact part that you just very artfully outlined is the crux of my argument in opposition to what you think is going to be what I see as a slippery slope. So I agree with you that the direction things are going or heading in the direction that you say so. I disagree in the slope. I think it's going to take much longer to get there. And the reason why it's going to take longer to get there is because you need the generation that is inclined to adapt that form of an economic model with their own. And I don't think the next one coming up, ours, is adept to that. It's not that they don't do it well. They want that individual thing. And then to blow that out further, what you talked about is the difference between 15,000, built in, let's say, 1 month of a Nissan Sentra or something. And you're looking at every truck built in a month at Peterbilt or any other name brand, right? Much different. So do you know how many trucks are built a year, generally speaking?
I don't have the number at the top of my head. I've seen it
Ballpark it.
I can't remember.
It's somewhere between 190,000 and 270,000.
I was going to say hundreds of thousands, but low hundreds of thousands.
It's very low, right?
Yeah.
And then the variability amongst those trucks is almost per truck in some ways.
Yeah, because we spec work
sleepers and how all my different needs. So a guy that's hauling logs, in North Florida has a very different need in a vehicle than does a guy that's got to pull trailers from intermodal to whatever, right? Across, long highways, garbage trucks, buses, there's so much variability in application amongst all those only in a good year, 250,000 pieces, all that variability. And so from a manufacturing perspective, I see a great challenge in trying to fulfill their needs in a online environment where you're same day in urban areas and your next day in rural. Do you know, as a manufacturer, how much inventory I have to push into the market in 3PL warehouses or even in a distribution warehouse in order to be able to satisfy that? It's very difficult. Mm-hmm. Very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you that okay, so there's two parts to that. So on one, in 2017, something happened that most people don't know. And that is that somebody cracked the code on how to categorize those variants on all the work trucks. Mm-hmm. And as we know, it's kind of like the first person who ran the 10 or 4 minute mile right? Like nobody had ever done it before. And then once somebody did it, like
Right.
everybody can do it now.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of idea. And that since 2017, a lot of companies have just continued to understand how to do that. And what is interesting is if you take like PACCAR, Kenworth, Peterbilt, and you take Mack Volvo, how much of the parts on those two makes across all years do you think would be similar? Like would be identical, rather identical? Like what percentage? Do you have
It
any idea?
depends. No, well, it really depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about engine platforms, if you're talking about emissions,
We're going to just go bumper to bumper.
I don't think you can do that because glad hands are the same everywhere you go, relatively speaking.
Right.
Airlines, brass fittings, you know, you start loading on PTOs, you start loading on fan clutches that have a great deal of variability and modulation in them. Please enlighten me.
Yeah. So it's shocking. It shocked my socks off when I found out 70% of the parts are identical, like crossing to each other. 30% are completely unique. So this is the fundamental change where all of a sudden technology companies are like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought it was going to be way less than that. And once they understand that it's not, then they go, Pareto's principle kicks in, right? Which is 80-20 rule, as some people might understand it, right? Where like 80% of your sales come from 20% of your inventory. So if 70% of the trucks are identical, as a rough number, it's not as difficult and you don't need as much inventory as you think. But I'll put a big but and a big asterisk on that. Figuring out the technology to make it really super easy for someone to pull out their smartphone and order a part is really, really hard. Mm-hmm. But it's not half as hard as figuring out how to deliver and actually, distribute the product. And there's a reason. Like I interviewed Chris from Gen Alpha. She's the president of that e-commerce company.
I saw it.
And we talked about how much money Amazon has spent on fulfillment. Like figuring out how to identify the parts is a super important component. And it's really hard to do in heavy duty, but it's possible. And in the last 3 years, technology, as we know with Moore's law, technology is doubling roughly every just under 2 years. It's not going to be a couple more doubles in heavy duty, and that part is going to actually become relatively easy, which really is only 4 years from now. It's the fulfillment that takes real imagination and a significant investment in cash. So when those things come together, I think we see an acceleration. But I'm not dismissive of your idea of like your friend who has that repair shop still buying through an online version of what used to be called traditional distribution with traditional retail. I'm not opposed to that. I actually think that that's really smart. And I think that's one of the ways of solving the fulfillment part of what we're talking about, for sure. Absolutely. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So again, I respect the boldness of your vision, and I look for people that are bold in their visions. And so I'm glad we were able to get together. I'm cautionary because I've spent a significant amount of time, both professionally as well as academically, working on trying to figure out what it is that the world looks like after things kind of congeal back together again. We're about to break apart in many ways. And that's going to cause a lot of things economically in the stock market and in equities and in real estate and commercial real estate, as well as both residential. How does that affect consumption? Because consumption is the thing that drives our industry. And so I want to understand that.
And for me, like what's my motivation in all this? My motivation is that this is one of the best groups of people on the planet. I love this industry.
Me too.
We're awesome people.
Yeah.
And I'm tired of people saying, well, that's the way we've always done it, and ignoring everything else that's going on around us that the warning signs are there. My quote is, the waters have gone out and the tsunami wave of disruption is coming.
Yeah.
You want to stick your head in the sand down on the beach, or do you want to move as an industry to more solid ground, right?
Great.
So I like the concept of, hey, we're about to break apart and things are going to get worse before they get better, but they will get better.
Absolutely.
And people's lives hang in the balance, their
Yes.
economics, their families, the raising of children, all of those things, right? Those really important fundamental things to our society. So as a motivator for me, I'm trying to get people to think differently. And I love that you wanted to come on and talk about how to think differently and to get me to think differently, right? And to introduce me and expose me to new ideas. I'm very, very open to all of that. And I think that anybody watching or listening to this discussion, hopefully they come away with it with going, you know what? I'm going to think differently moving forward, and I'm going to try to impact people in a positive way. Because at the end of the day, we are our people. That's just the way it is.
Well, thinking differently, what does that mean, right? And so, I mean, I would answer that meaning that I want to challenge the things I hold to be true. And that means everything in my life. And I don't want to get overly existential, but, this is what I believe to be true. And I look for things that try to blow that up, because even if it blows it up a little bit, I get a little bit sharper, a little bit better, right? And again, it's how the generations are going to consume technology, because we can't keep up with the rate of its development. And you said Moore's theory. I don't know that. I got to write that down.
Moore's law. It's the doubling of technology, and it's getting faster and faster, and it has a exponential curve, right?
Correct.
So our next double is going to be just like astronomical. If you don't really understand what that is, I don't know if you've ever heard of like, would you like $100,000 today, or I'll give you a penny and double it every day for 30 days. Take the penny, because the last two doubles puts you over $1 million.
Right. So I don't know it as Moore's law, but I do follow Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah.
Do you know who he is?
No, I have not familiar with that.
He used to be the director of innovation at Google.
Okay.
And he's a futurist. And
right.
So, but he talks about, he came up through MIT, and I watched a talk with him where he tells a story where they were doing a job for DARPA or something with the government, and the inspector general had come in and wanted to inspect their progress, and it had been a number of years, and they were 1% done. And the inspector general was all upset, and he was blown away by it. It's exactly what you're talking about. We only have 7 iterations left.
Yeah.
1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, you're done.
Yeah.
And that's how that works.
Yeah. So to your point about the way that technology doesn't shape generations use the technology, it's going to be fascinating in the next 10, 20 years of our lifetime. I personally think, like, when I think of some of the elders that I knew growing up, they were born in like 1880. And before they died, they went from horse and buggy to man on the moon. We're living through that now.
Yeah.
Like our lifespan and like our children's lifespan, they're going to look back and they're going to be like that group of people who went from horse and buggy to man on the moon. It's just going to be insane what they get to witness towards the ends of their lifetime.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if we understand that there is a sinusoidal flux to things, we can look back to the generation that our children are going to become and at least find the situation around them that generated their buying habits over a long period of time, their entire lives. And so for my boys, I have 2 sons who are 14 and 17.
And my daughter's 16. So right in that group.
You want to understand who they're going to be at 20, at 40, at 60, and at 80? Look to the silent generation. That's the last time this cycle came through. And so they're going to be highly socialized. They're going to be very risk adverse. They're not going to try to upset the apple cart because they came from generations before them that were upsetting the apple cart X, right? So we can look back, and you don't have to go 1 iteration. You can go back 3, 4, 5, 7 times and see that pattern. So we know to some degree what our children are going to be like once they enter the workforce. So your daughter, my 2 sons are going to college in the next few years. Another 4 years after that, they're going to get out and enter the workforce at 20 years old. They're entering young adulthood. What are they going to be like? How do we manage them? What are going to be in their buying habits? Like we can understand, not to like a very granular degree, but we can understand generally what their mood is going to be like.
Yeah. And I mean, this whole theory that we've been talking about has come under some scrutiny. So anybody listening, don't take anything we are talking about as fact. This is two guys who love our industry and who wanted to come on and challenge each other and push each other with the hope that people listening wouldn't just take what we say as fact, but would look at things from a new perspective, go out into the world, figure out where you see things, do your best to innovate, to make change in positive direction, to contribute to your community, to the industry. That's what this is all about. That's what we want you to do.
I can't agree more. 100%.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and I just like to remind everyone to focus on cost per mile and let's keep those trucks and trailers rolling. You can watch our next video. Make sure to click the like button, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.